Hello, everyone. It looks like we're live. Thank you for joining our Internet of Things community call. My name is Christina Gore, and it's my pleasure to be producing this call on behalf of the Mozilla Learning Team. In this call, we're going to be discussing Mozilla's exploration of the Internet of Things, innovation and Internet of Things in action, and user control of personal data in the home. But before we dive into our exciting discussion today, please help us spread the word to others who are joining us live that you have to refresh the community call landing page in order to see the live stream, and that's teach.mozilla.org/community/community call. We don't want anybody to miss it, so help us spread the word. And if you're joining for the first time, please add your name to the Etherpad in the upper right-hand section so that we know who you are. We'll find a chat box in the lower right-hand section of the Etherpad that you can ask questions, and then the main discussion notes and questions can happen in the large box on the left. We encourage you to participate from wherever you are around the globe, so please add your name to the roll call on line 16 in the Etherpad. Please ask questions, comments, add your ideas, and bring your own perspective to the conversation. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Thorne, who will be leading the discussion with our guests on the call today. Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah, thank you. It's very fun to be in this call and to share some of the stuff we've been working on. So together with Jon Rogers, who I'll introduce in a second, we've co-leading a hub around the Internet of Things and what Mozilla can be contributing to this space. And in particular, we're really interested in how we take some of the values that are represented in the Mozilla Manifesto, things like privacy and security, but also this understanding and the importance of reading, writing, and participating online. And how do we take these values and see how they show up in the Internet of Things, especially as we see the Internet of Things being kind of the next generation of computing. But at the moment, a lot of the things we see in the Internet of Things space could probably be better categorized as Internet of Shit. And we'll throw the Twitter link in there if you want to see some very shitty innovation happening at the moment around what IoT is. And so we started this project, this initiative, as a way to say, let's imagine something else. Like, let's imagine something different and something that's more human-centered. So we're today in the call going to share some of what we see that being.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. And we also have Jon Rogers with us today, who is Professor of Product Design from the University of Dundee in Scotland. So do you want to tell us more about yourself, Jon? Oh, it looks like you're muted, Jon. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, it's just a delay.
There you go.
Hello, everyone. I'll do that again. I'm really good at muting myself and unmuting myself. And I'm really interested in that research that explores how the internet and the web can come into our lives in a very meaningful way that's driven by insights from user research that then follows through into a kind of creative technology approach to playful objects that then can be tested and evaluated in the real world for all that that means, good and bad. But fundamentally, I think we all have a responsibility to start to look at how the Internet of Things is meaningful, sustainable, and will add value, and will last longer than possibly the time allowed by Google before they brick it. Controversial. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jon. And last but not least, we have Rikta Krishnaswamy, user researcher from Quicksand in Bangalore, India. Can you tell us more about yourself?
Unmute myself first. Hello, everybody. It's really great to make all your acquaintances. This is Rikta. I'm a user, a researcher, and an industrial designer by training. And most of my work revolves around prioritizing and understanding what's important for human beings, whether it's in the context of technology, services, or experiences. And I'm really excited about exploring plausible futures in the context of the connected home and IoT products. Like Michelle said, that moves away from the Internet of Shit and goes into the Internet of awesome things that make sense for living people. I'm here to basically share a very tiny research I've done over the last 10 days with inputs from Michelle and Jon, and excited to see how this makes sense to the community. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We're looking forward to hearing about it. So again, thank you very much for joining us, to Jon, Rikta, and Michelle. And also, if you're in the Etherpad, thank you very much for joining the conversation. It's going to be a great discussion. And so please ask questions, participate. I'll be verbalizing some questions as they pop up in the Etherpad to add to the conversation, so don't be shy. So okay, Michelle, take it away.
Cool, thank you. So I thought we might use this call to actually have a bit of an informal and provocative chat with my co-conversants here, Jon and Rikta, and Christina also to jump in. So I have some questions that just jumped in my head that I was interested to get your guys' response to, because I think this might help illuminate some of the things that we're doing as a program, and then we can follow up with some of the specific activities we're doing and how folks who are listening in could get involved or help shape this with us. But I was curious, Jon, you mentioned Google bricking these products. Can you explain a little bit what bricking is and why this is something that's dangerous or signals a trend that we might want to have some counter examples for, and why the work we're doing is kind of important to be the anti-brick?
Yeah, so let's look at it another way. When you buy an electrical appliance, let's say it's your cooker or your fridge or your television, do you honestly expect that somebody else could be switching that supply to that television or that fridge off without your permission? Okay, we know they have power failures and are breaking, but the fundamental right that when you buy that you know you're going to be able to control that. But this isn't the same with replacing our content and driven through the internet. But what if that provider decides in their walled garden to take away the keys for you and then take off all the devices you have in your home and to effectively leave them as no more than bricks that you might use to build another thing with, but it won't be connecting to the service you bought it from? And that's really worrying, and that's really wrong. And I'm pretty sure that we can do something about that, right? I want to hear some hands up on the Etherpad.
And have you guys experienced having a product like that you purchased like the service be discontinued, or the sense of like disempowerment and rage that comes with having bought something and then having like you aren't able to fix it, you're not able to open it up, you're not able to repair it, the service is discontinued without any path to like resolution, and like I don't know, I would find that incredibly frustrating. I mean, and Rikta, one thing that strikes me also with the work you're doing in the context you're in is how India is such a great example of like technological self-sufficiency and reliance, like the idea of like, Jugaad, we're going to make the solutions that we want and that we need, and we're going to make it with the things we have available. And also this kind of independence that we see in India, how like there was the free basics debate, internet, Facebook basically saying like, hey, we want to provide Facebook services free of charge to all Indian phone users, and at the same time the kind of Indian public coming back and saying, this is actually going to be a disservice to us or disenfranchising for us. And I'm wondering if there are parallels with how you see this kind of self-reliance, Jugaad, independence in how people approach technology, even with your research or people that you work with. Like if we have some inspiration from this kind of independent DIY approach to technology.
So I mean, that's an amazing question. I think the 7 years of my experience as a user experience designer still don't have the right answers for it, but I think there are three things that really drive how people use products and value things here. One is that it is largely an informal economy outside of the cities and its growing edges. Systems and services aren't robust, so people have to be self-reliant for their lives to work, right? And the kind of skills and the kind of workarounds that you have to then invest in are just vibrant. They're amazing. So you will still have people farmers who have smartphones. They had probably the first Nokia communicator even before a businessman in the city had it. And they have the most amazing information networks based on paper because electricity is a problem. So it's not just technology, but also the kind of infrastructure that is required for that technology and the absence of that drives these very vibrant ways of using things that gets termed jugaad. Jugaad basically means bricolage. It means you make do with what you have. With your own resources and talents, and which also means that you have a culture of people just opening things up without thinking too much about warranties and service voids and things like that. So yeah, the context is really important because you have a lot of products that are probably tested in far more urban environments being used in really, really crazy places where it's super hot, there's no electricity for more than 10 hours a day, and those are the actual needs that these products don't fulfill, and people have to create their own solutions. And that's really amazing that you've had products that have allowed that. So Nokia will always be the first example anybody will, an Indian will talk about when it comes to open products, because you had a phone, a torch, a radio, a brick all in one. The other question that you had around the Facebook free basic services, and that also talks a lot about you're moving largely from people who are not just consumers, who are active content creators who understand the internet in a very different way, especially with the exodus of kind of startups and services around e-commerce. And the interesting thing with Facebook was, I think Indians don't like lock-in, like they don't like any kind of tech that on the outset wants to create this lock-in, right? And you had a lot of big businesses who didn't read the fine print when they signed on for free basics, and all of them pretty much opted out, except for a few who probably just forgot to opt out. And it was a big win. I think 40 urban elite guys who campaigned, and it became a big discussion. It was really interesting because it became about entitlement, it became about privilege, it became about politics, and it was not just about an internet company wanting to do good for 100 billion farmers anymore. It was about what can a government actually do to secure the future of a country where a lock-in is very evident if a service like this is going to come into power. So I think in that way, a lot of the open internet advocacy from other places have really inspired Indian kind of like open web activists, and it's really nice to see the government actually making a very balanced, very informed decision. Like if you read the TRI report, it's so succinct and it's so like a 5-year-old kid can understand that. And I think that's what it really did. It humanized what the open web means for all of us, for us normal people who don't talk the language of tubes. And yeah, does that answer your question?
That more than that's beautiful. Yeah, definitely some themes here around like bricking objects and lock-in, and how to have like constructive alternatives for that. And also, you and John talked a lot about designing things that people really want and really need, and that come from understanding like local context, and also how tools can be a source of like empowerment, and also how this kind of design research that we're engaging in can be a source of inclusion as well. I'd be interested to hear, Rikta and John, if you guys have, just from your experience of having done this kind of work a lot, like some glimpses of hope and inspiration for what is it like to actually co-create with communities, and what can we learn from actually doing this work in the open and alongside real people, real users.
John, do you want to start, and then I can jump in?
Okay, sure. I think that co-creating and the act of bringing people into the design process, whether that's the writing of code, the building of objects, or the designing of services, or all of those, is actually, I'm kind of feeling it's not optional anymore. It's just how we should be working. I think it's the only way to have relevant ideas, that if ideas are bubbling up in that grassroots approach into physical things. And that means there's a very new role for the designer in there, that you have to not just be able to physically build a thing. I am in my hotel with a kettle. Somebody's made that, thank you, I could have a cup of tea. But what about the idea for heating water in the right way that's relevant to me? So it doesn't have to be a kettle. It might be something more useful that's come from somebody else who doesn't know how to make a kettle, but might have the great idea for that. And for me, that's where we are looking ahead for not just the Internet of Things, but many of the physical and digital services that are coming our way in those products. I'm going to give you one example. I think I put it earlier. Is we recently designed an internet-connected mirror or a reflecting device service that had an AI that guessed your age while you're looking in a mirror. And then it played music, the Internet of Things object in the mirror played music from when this AI thought you were 14. This idea didn't come from me or our research team. It came from the shop owner that we were building this with. And if you think about this for a minute, this led us to start thinking about, well, how are cameras and CCTV being used in shops at the moment? It turns out that in the UK, a third, 30% of all shops in retail, mainstream high street retail, are using AIs and recognition connected to CCTV to understand their customers without telling them. In fashion, it raises to 60%.
Oh,
and
that's
nobody
so
knows
terrible.
this.
Terrible.
It's absolutely appalling. However, we have, I think we put a design response that came from a small independent shopkeeper in Dundee. I'm going to promote him. It's called Specs. Any glasses shop in the world. See if you can beat that out there. And it came from him, and he didn't know about this bigger debate. So his idea enabled us to have a much bigger debate through an object that's in his shop that revealed a lot about user control and privacy within the connected IT and on our shopping districts right now.
All right, I'll add into what John was talking about, design research. So I've worked on like a variety of projects where design research is used to leverage design of new technologies, services, experiences. I think fundamentally you can make things in two ways. You make technology fit people's lives, or you make people's lives fit technology. And I'm far more interested in following values that people already have and building things around that, because it's more difficult, and it's messier in that situation, but a lot of the work that I do revolves around actually understanding how people make sense of the technology that they have, and more often than not, the hacks that they create are far more amazing than the technology itself. And I think that's where design research really comes in and helps you create, just prioritize, because as a maker, as a person who has ideas, you want to just do as much as you can, right? And this kind of helps anchor it in a larger cause. This is what I was talking about, like the why behind why people make. And I think it's just having a stronger why and not just a what or a how. And I think design research, or any kind of research, design research is just like a tagline. You know, if you're just curious about humans, the way they interact and how they make sense of their world, you're already a design researcher. You're already doing the job that I do, not being called one. So I think that's where a lot of this is going to be really interesting in shaping the plausible kind of like futures of very, very human-centered, human value-based technology that is not about just commercial gain, but it is about commercial gain as well as adding value in the most unique ways possible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think we've in this explorations of IoT that we have a little more detail listed in the Etherpad if people are curious to read more about just kind of like the setup for it. But I think it's been really great learning from you, Rikta, and Jon, and others who have done design research, because I think it's something that Mozilla hasn't done that much of. So it's for me a big inspiration to see what are the techniques and processes that you employ and how that informs the things you make and the people you convene, and just the role of design research in having, I guess, yeah, building better and more relevant solutions. So maybe Jon, you because you've been a great mentor in thinking about how we use these kinds of techniques. How do you see design research being used in in the development of products? Like, how do we use that kind of research? What's the cycle that we put that research to work in?
So I lost a tiny bit of that at the end.
Oh,
So
sorry, my internet's slow. I don't know why.
no, but actually, let's just. I'll say something, and you can just make it sound like
That's
I'm
perfect.
answering your question, Michelle. So I'll repeat that back. So it sounded really to me that you were interested in maybe giving some of the people tuning into this conversation a little bit of kind of why, so what, why the hell should I do design research? Does it matter? And what could come out of it? So my first thing is, why does it matter? And I think that having relevant ideas and responsible ideas is fundamental. I think as someone, I trained as an engineer, and I'd love to dive into the code, and I love to kind of get making stuff straight away. And the temptation is just, yeah, ship it out, doesn't matter. And actually, for me, I think my learning as I kind of got into design research sort of halfway through my career, it opened up a very important reflective space where I was thinking about that idea and making sure that idea was with and for the people that I was working, in a community of. So it means that it's harder, it's messier, and it's trickier. I don't think you're going to end up with the smoothest, shiniest product. I think you're going to end up with something that initially might not make sense. But what it might do is give opportunity for people then to join in, to iterate it themselves, and to push it out again through their research and their insights that combine with yours. So in a nutshell, why does it matter? Your ideas are better. I think it's a much better way of dealing with complexity and the reality of the messy world. And I think longer down the line, you end up with something far more relevant. But you may not end up with something as quick, as trendy, as smooth and shiny, because it might challenge people a bit more. What do you reckon, Rikta? Does that resonate with you?
Totally. Just spoke my mind, Jon.
I read your mind.
Yeah. I completely agree with what Jon's been saying, and I think what's really interesting about design research, and I think design research is kind of like a catch-all phrase for just being, like just iterating far more and not being very comfortable with the answers that you have in your head. What's really interesting about some of the tools and techniques is that it's about opening out the process. It's about bringing the intended people who are supposed to use that technology at very critical points. It's kind of always grounding your own hypotheses and insights, and I think that's what it's really great for, right? Anytime you think that there's this really nice example of like a boardroom that's very human-centered, and there's always an empty chair that represents the user. I mean, it's like just that. It's just, what would Dave do, or what would my mom do, or what would my dad do, and really kind of make the process a little bit more democratic, where you're not just the creator, but you're also the assimilator of all these points of view. And yeah, and that's why it's really great, and that's why even though it takes a little longer, I think you yourself are more convinced, and you have a much stronger reason to go ahead with your own convictions. Yeah.
That's really powerful. And what's been interesting is so Rikta's been leading some design research and user research with us around this question of we started off saying, like, you know, IoT at the moment, it's Internet of Shit. We have all these terrible services that are like tracking us and logging us, and we don't really have on and off switches. We don't have the ability to have any control over how these connected environments are coming online. As John said, like in the retail space, it's particularly creepy. And we started off with kind of maybe a certain vision in mind about what privacy in IoT could be. And I was thinking maybe this is a nice way to bridge what we're starting to see coming out even from the early research that we've been looking at, which is like, okay, let's take this topic of privacy and let's really start to understand what let's prod that a little bit. And so we got a little more specific and we said, okay, actually what we're interested in is user control. So how do you have agency? How do you have control? How do you have comfort in all these other things? How do you have control around your personal data in the connected home? So we tried to get more specific. Instead of just saying privacy, we tried to get a little more specific. And then we took this idea of user control of personal data in the connected home, which is incredibly geeky and hard to like interact with. Rikta led some kind of interviews and conversations with people, real families, and just different like living arrangements, and tried to hear a little bit what actually this means in real life. And so, Rikta, maybe you could share some of the stories or some of the responses that that you received as we looked at this theme of privacy and IoT. Like what are real people saying, or how did that change how we even approach this topic?
Sure, I'll quickly run you. I'm just going to share my screen. There's this PDF that I had shared with some of the participants who we'll be working with over the next week in Berlin. And here are some of my favorite ones. So I think this one is something that's resonated with all of us, and we were talking about fitness and well-being in the context of family members that are separated by distance, and you have households where when the children are living in other cities, there are CCTV cameras installed in the old parents' home. You know, 3 brothers who are kind of all scattered all over the continent, and one of the brothers feeling really uneasy about watching the feed that shows their parents go about their daily life. And this is really interesting because you have, in contrast, this lady who's living with her husband, and her mom's house is really close by, and her way of kind of like showing care, or you know, like making sure that her mom's well is kind of going to her house and washing dishes before she comes back from work. So there are these very direct ways in which people are kind of showing care and, like, you know, wanting to make sure that their loved ones are fine. But there are also these beautiful, nuanced, indirect, softer ways in which people are exercising, especially when you're talking about child kind of like looking after the well-being of their parent who might be older and might be actually slightly more obstinate about relinquishing that control, right? And there's some really nice examples that in the context of like connected homes become even interesting, because it's not a personal space, it's a space that's shared between so many people, and there's so many complex kind of like relationships that you have to manage. For example, there's this young couple who recently had a baby, and they have 2 fridges in their home because one of them is vegetarian and the other one is not. So they have a vegetarian fridge and a sin fridge that has alcohol and cold cuts, and you know, it's just a very tongue-in-cheek way of kind of exercising that habit or that sensibility. So the husband's actually bought this fridge magnet that says pure veg and put it on the fridge as a very tongue-in-cheek way of teasing his wife. And it can actually show how people give up control, or how they maintain control while sharing a space with their wife, with their mother, who probably doesn't live there but still has a lot of say in what they do. And there are these very interesting kind of like linkages that we can start making analogies for what it means for data, for control, for privacy in the connected home. And yeah, I think what we are really excited about in the coming workshop is how this can actually um, provoke and inspire people to, get similar stories from their own lives, and see if what's happening in India starts making sense for somebody in Berlin, somebody in the US, and that's how we build a much more universal kind of vision for this, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Like, these for me, seeing the images and hearing the stories and understanding a little more about, like, as I think you said earlier, Rikta, like, what are the behaviors and principles people already have in their lives, and how do we, like, just build on top of them, or support and foster, the things people are already doing. So, like, I love the example of, like, the sin fridge, or these kinds of physical surfaces people use to communicate in their house, and like writing on chalkboards or leaving notes on the fridge. And these are already, habits and patterns that people have. And so it's interesting to kind of explore, like, when and where does, like, connectivity and the internet add value to these things, and what, how could we build something that is in response to how people are are already behaving. So that it was very cool. Oh yeah, sorry. There's the fridge with shopping lists and.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry. I think I just dropped out for a bit.
Yeah, we can. Sorry, just to see. I think John's on the seaside of and has low connectivity. Speaking of low connectivity, so I was just checking on him, but he seems to be just here with audio.
I'm still here.
He's still here. All right, John. What sort of ideas came to mind when you started to see these scenarios?
So I think more of a reflection than any ideas immediately, but I think there's something that was really poignant for me in here. That one of the, I don't think we showed it here, but one of the images that Rikta and her team collected was people in a flat who put carpet under each of the bed legs because it was on a wooden or a stone floor. So every time the bed moved, they were worried about what the neighbours would hear. Now, you can conjure up images here. But that suddenly made me think that when somebody asked me to say, tell me something iconic about security in your home, everybody on listening to this, suddenly think, an image of security, really quickly, what comes to your head? Of course, it's a lock and a key, isn't it, or a padlock. And actually, human security is so much more than that. When I put my kids to bed at night, they're young, and I put them to bed at, like, let's say, well, they're kind of older now, but even though the oldest is nearly 13, I put them to bed at 9 o'clock. When I go to bed at sort of 10 or 11 o'clock, I'll still go in and give them a kiss and, move them over. And Fred and I were talking about this. He's like, yeah, you do kind of check their breathing. It's sort of, that sounds really paranoid parents, but all parents will do that. And security it's so much richer and complex and human than just about sticking a lock on your door. In fact, our door lock doesn't even work on our door. My wife texted me this morning because I left at 5 a.m. She came down at 8. She said, you left the front door wide open. I was like, yeah. I'm not going to tell you where I live, but it's a very safe and secure place. But security is more than that. It's about, there's a lot of emotional connectivity to security. And once we get into a physical place, it becomes really interesting and way tougher and way harder, way messier, as we keep saying, than you'd ever think you would get from just sticking a padlock on my device, digitally or physically. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there because I think it speaks so much more to how, even in a thing that we think of as quite a hard topic, a serious topic of security, when it comes down to the Internet of Things, is a really rich, diverse, possibly even playful place. Think about
Playful
that.
security.
Yeah.
I think that's so right on too, because in the Mozilla Berlin office we were taking together. There's a free online course by IDEO called Human-Centered Design, which I can recommend if anyone's interested to learn more about design research and some of these techniques we're talking about. And we did some like interviews and some excursions, and also we're looking at this question of kind of privacy and security in the connected spaces. And it was very fascinating, as you were talking about, John, to think about. We had kind of come in with such a like browser mentality to security, and then we started to think like, okay, how does this actually play out in our kind of embodied, lived environments, and what are the patterns and stuff that we already see of people thinking about security in their homes. And what we found, I personally found interesting from those kinds of conversations was a lot of times people actively make a decision to be less, let's say, secure in a textbook sense because they're kind of making an informed choice about a behavior. So for example, you said you don't lock your doors. That's technically a not secure thing to do, but you have a certain level of like trust and informedness in your choice, and also a risk that you're taking. But it's like, you know, there's an infrastructure there. There's the ability to lock or unlock, and you choose to keep it unlocked because that's also how you choose to, I don't know, see your neighborhood or to live. And we noticed actually a lot of people we interviewed said similar things. They said like, yeah, I should lock my doors, but I don't as often, or I, should like not park my car on this street that tends to have robberies, but I do because this is the kind of I still want to have this kind of. I'm less secure in some ways, but I also feel more confident and in control because I decided to do something, even if it was technically not secure. So anyway, I thought that for me was kind of interesting, like the power of informed choice and control as a form of a form of engaging with security.
And I think that health question of thinking about healthful fitness or healthy fitness and well-being, it's really when you start to think of like your health security. What does that mean? And that's beyond just the issues of how do you, and we need to make our data secure on our devices, but actually it's like, well, what type of data? What's right? What's socially going to be the right way and a secure emotional way of getting health data? It's so complex, and I thought there's a lovely question on the Etherpad about examples, and sorry I can't answer it. I don't have an answer to it, but this kind of any game-like examples that will teach families and schools about security. And wouldn't that be amazing if that included notions of food security? That how do you teach your kids about food security? Well, that might be that you teach them to cook is more important than you teach them that necessarily oil's going to run out and all these kind of very big stories, which are absolutely right and I'm terrified of. But actually, let's start at home and start with the home-connected stories about how we go about our daily lives, not just the big picture stuff that kids find it very difficult to relate to. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great shout out. And actually, I see Chad is in the Etherpad and maybe listening in, and I think he's done a lot of really interesting work, and maybe others on the call too, around how we can make these topics experiential and playful and relatable. And so I think Chad recently shared a link, which I'll just bring up here because it was quite cool, about it was. Do you know this kind of I don't know, phenomenon called escape from a room, where you lock 10 people in a room and you have to solve these clues and escape from the room within an hour? There was like a flip to that called escape out of the box, and it was like how you could bring kind of questions around things like security and connectivity into like a small lesson plan, like a small lesson where then kids are then actually exploring these topics in this very fun, playful way and escaping from this box. Maybe it goes back to what we talked about earlier, escaping from lock-in or bricked systems and opening up this technology, this opportunity, this sense of like control and agency with technology. So I thought that was I might go find that link you sent, Chad, and drop it in the Etherpad because I thought that was a really cool, cool thing to play with around how we can use games to explore these topics. Break out edu, as he says.
So I'm also loving to sort of looking at the Etherpad a little bit, if I'm riffing, if I'm out of this, but I think
yes.
some incredible comments coming through from, is it Robert? I love what you're saying around Nest and behaviors of this, and well, what if it was looking at connected devices that hold leaders accountable? What if the Nest reported public housing violations by building owners? You know, this is, what if it's affordable? You know, this is amazing. It's like these, you know, it comes back to the kinds of data we want to collect, the social side of that data, responsibility of that data. Wouldn't it be amazing to run a program of what data do people want from their homes that is empowering and for good? So yes, it could have a beautiful, shiny interface like a Nest, but it could be something that actually is something that is going to affect, you know, the 99% rather than the 1%. You know, how do we design for the 6 billion? My very clever colleague at work, Nick, he saw Rikta's your design research, and he said, this feels like an entirely new topic. How do you design for the 6 billion? The 6, you know, and how do we do that? And Nest definitely doesn't fit into that 6 billion.
Yeah, this is so interesting. I'm also reading up here on the, or sorry, Rikta, go ahead if you want to respond to. I'm just jumping, reading Etherpad's comments, so I don't want to monopolize.
Go ahead, Michelle. I was just excitedly agreeing with what John was talking about. Go on, it's fine.
Actually, Rikta, there was a few other comments on the Etherpad asking for some examples, and maybe you could talk people through about your some of the rural work you've done with farmers and where the research went. I was just trying to dig around, but I've got a very slow internet connection, so maybe just ask the person that did it rather than Google who did it. So yes, so examples of your rural farmer work.
I don't think I've been able to find good examples online. So the student project that a friend of mine worked for with Nokia Research Lab back when they were Nokia, and it was basically looking at informal trade, informal networks that informed trade prices for farmers in rural parts of India. So it was really interesting how like the local shopkeepers who had the PCO telephone kind of got information when he heard farmers talk to their suppliers in the city, and how he became kind of like a beacon for that information for other farmers who didn't have kind of like contacts in the city. So I can share, if I can find it, I can share a research report that we made on the project, and it's really interesting that a lot of this, I mean, if you think about it, it was like non-encrypted data in a way. Like somebody just kind of overhearing a conversation and that becoming a way to get real-time prices on vegetables and what to sell it at, because you don't have access to that kind of information. Of course, like now a lot of it has changed because you have NGOs who kind of like have community managers who pass this information around so farmers don't get fleeced. But I think by and large, a lot of places in India just getting the right price for what you should sell your vegetables at is still like a big kind of struggle. And there's some very nice examples when we had done the research in Maharashtra to see how people depended on these kind of like P2P networks and almost like very espionage ways in which they got the information so that they could make a little bit more money. Yeah, and there are many other examples of like just spaces in the community that's like a school in the day and a rural BPO in the afternoon, and just in interesting ways in which the same space, because it has a computer, can be a teaching institution, BPO for the local hospital to digitize their records, and in the evening can become like a distance learning class where somebody in Delhi can do video chats with the students who are kind of in larger, in like 6th grade and above, to solve tougher problems that they might not have teachers for. So there's also this kind of like recycling of resources for different needs based on like the tech that you have. So just like a small computer, like 10 computers in one tiny school in Rajasthan can actually be like 4 or 5 things through the day. And I mean, these are just like tip of the iceberg. I'm trying to look for like just, the thing is, these are not very nicely documented, but I can put in examples from our own website where we've done projects of this nature, and at least that'll give you guys a starting point to look at the kind of examples I was talking about. Yeah.
That's yeah. Please share some of those examples. I think someone's asking that on. I'll find the line for you in the Etherpad. And 2 other comments on Etherpad I was going to shout out were if anyone has. There was a question here on line 118 about resources and prototypes from the local Mozilla networks around. I presume this was about. I think like teaching these topics. If people have any links or examples or other inspiration, we could start a little list here on line 119. And the other one I wanted to shout out was on line 115. So there's this conversation here in the Etherpad about the home and what is the role of maybe digital services in the home, especially as things like we start to have more infrastructure that's smart, like smart meters and smart grids and all that. But also there's already a ton of information about homes, which would be really interesting to have on some sort of digital service, like the year it was built, maybe some understanding about like opportunities or disputes in the neighborhood you might want to know about if you moved into a home, or maybe the preferred repairman for a certain thing. Like there's actually a ton of things that would be really interesting data sets to have and dashboards you could have around the home that would give you agency inside of it. And so I wanted to shout out a project by another Mozilla friend and collaborator, Alexandra de Samsosino, who's involved in this project called The Good Home. And she has a link here on line 115 called Home Suite, which was like exploring what this digital service could look like. And she proposes this is something that shouldn't be done by any private company, but rather this is something that should be owned at a neighborhood council or city council level, because that could actually really be helpful data for a city to know about where they might have issues and things like this. So that was a project I wanted to give a shout out to. I have an eye on the clock, so I know we probably want to wind down in a few minutes, but I wanted to make sure if Christina or Rikta or John, if anyone had other like thoughts or insights or links that you thought you wanted to share, or that you wanted to share, or other comments that are coming up in the Etherpad you wanted to respond to.
I could call out on line 118, it's moving, but Rikta, there was some specific questions about your work and how you were describing about the farmers and non-digital professors hacking devices to serve their needs. Do you have examples that live somewhere, things that we can look at and share with the community members? Oh, you're muted.
I'll have to dig out some PDFs from my own archive, so I can link that to you as soon as I find it. And I'll just put in a few links that I think might be interesting on the chat.
Great, thank you.
This is cool. So I see someone added from Hive Chicago, the Smart Grid project, which looks really cool, and this playable fashion. Ooh.
Yeah, that reminded me. We've actually been zooming into the home a lot, and so I think it's really relevant that we talk about other things. And I think the scalability of the Internet of Things in relation to our body, fashion's a very, very interesting, complex topic, and one of our long-term collaborators. I'll send you all a link to Jane Wallace, who does a lot of work around. She calls herself a digital jeweler, and I worked on the Mirror project with her, and she brings such a sense of self and the body to discussions. And I think there's nothing more personal than maybe jewelry and the things you wear. And if you think about jewelry and the stories that it carries and the generations it passes over, it's the longevity of it. So that's zooming in to the home to a person and touching the skin. And something that touches the skin has to have so much care and consideration than maybe an object you can leave at home and go to work, or even putting it in your pocket, putting it next to your skin. And this is okay, controversial comment number 7 of the day. I think this is actually where Apple will start to feel they're starting to come unstuck in terms of what they're doing. I think the watch going on the skin is a completely different offering of top-down design than a rectangle that fits in your pocket or in your bag. I think it's way different. I think they have stepped over users far too much in the race to go onto your body, and I think my prediction is we're going to start to see a real backlash against these kind of ubiquitous form and for the elite. Oh, let's make it gold. Let's make it $20,000, and that'll make it cool. No, it doesn't. Everyone's got them. It's just gluttony. It's the internet gone wrong, and I think but I don't want to shy away from that debate around preciousness. And precious doesn't mean expensive or rare. It just means personal and important and relevant. And it doesn't come out of a top-down designer saying, you should all wear this. It comes out of people in a grassroots way, like all of you as a lovely Mozilla community, starting to have the ideas that bubble up and get translated into a very human Internet of Things that might actually be on your body as well as your home, in your car, in your fields, in your cities. I'm zooming out now. In space! It can go anywhere. Shall I stop now? So, yeah, rant over. Back to mute.
No, I loved it. And maybe that's a nice segue, because there's a question here on line 149 about the Berlin Design Sprint, which we're doing in 2 days, and how, what it is and how we will share out what comes out of it. So the idea is the only way we're going to learn about how to shape the Internet of Things with these values around agency and control and all this is by actually making things that respond to it. So the idea is we want to make some provocative prototypes, things that are actually informed by, Rikta's great research around these are some behaviors and patterns and opportunities based on people's homes already. So where are some interventions we could bring, some constructive ways to look at IoT in these spaces. So the design sprint is very maker-tastic. That's one of our less yak, more hack events of the year. And there'll be about 20 people that we have invited to Berlin. We're going to be camped out in the Fab Lab here in Berlin. And I think what's really nice is it's going to be a mixture of people who have kind of this user research and design research expertise. Some people who are really talented as makers and crafts people who run their own maker spaces, as well as web technologists who are really into web engineering and designing for mobile experiences. Plus privacy activists and people who really care about the legal, educational, political aspects of privacy and control and user control. So we have a nice group of people. And we're helping them join up in teams, and they're going to be responding to the scenarios that Rikta shared. And we're just going to help facilitate them jamming together. Jon has helped us secure all sorts of electronics and, various Fab Labby materials, so that by the end of the 4 days, we hope to have a few physical things that we can showcase in Mozilla offices, in some other hacker spaces and museums we're in conversation with, as well as be openly documented so other people can kind of reproduce or remix the outcomes. And I think for us it's exciting because moving from this kind of the first few months of the year with this project has been much more conversational, exploratory, researchy, and I think this event is really us kind of going, okay, now we've got all these ideas and opportunities in our head. Let's start making some things. So we'll definitely be sharing that out in blogs and photos and animated GIFs. Actually, was going to be one of our deliverables. And I think that will help bring these topics to life and also be maybe an interesting thing to share back with this group if you're interested. John, do you have any other bits, or Rikta, about how we see the Berlin Design Sprint coming together, or how we can be sharing what we make there?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in. I think a challenge for the IoT community is that of sharing. I think Mozilla as a community are wonderful and amazing at sharing code. We can do that, and processes of learning code through community activities with Hive, New York. We've seen all these things coming through. I think that sharing the making of physical things is hard. But hey, we're not here to do things that are easy, right? I think we will find a way, and I don't want to find a way that's just about instructions on the internet. I think we can do that. It's much more about shared values, a shared call to action, and shared ways of making in a meaningful way that can be repeated openly by everyone and understood, but also remixed in a style of their own choice. So this is not the same as your IKEA make it at home manual, so it looks exactly the same everywhere. The fun thing will be, and the challenge will be, to make this bespoke for anyone to adapt and to build in their own way. How to do that? Well, Rikta's going to work that one out for us. Yeah. And all of you, like, I really want to find out. I think I'm not being frivolous here. I think it's really important that we recognise we don't actually know how to share this. There's some great practice. Our friends at WeVolver are doing some amazing things. They're at MozFest every year showing how they're openly documenting making, and lots of other examples. But we've still got, I feel, a long way to go so that anyone can look at this and go, not just, hey, I think I could do that, but wow, I want to do that. I have to do that. How can I not do this? I want to join that whatever crazy thing they're doing and build IoT that's meaningful and relevant.
That was
back to mute.
Back to mute. So I think we're coming up on the close of the call, and I know Christine might want to take us out. But Rikta, did you have any other bits, either things you're looking forward to, or final thoughts from today's chat?
Yeah. I think, like we discussed the first time we'd met, for me, what's really interesting is kind of, as a designer, I'm always kind of on the verge of like conceptual, and even the prototypes are often just provocations to get more out of the users or the intended recipients. And what I'm really looking forward to, outside of how this research gets translated into things that everybody's very motivated and passionate about, is also kind of building something tangible and interesting. And I think it's going to be a really fun exercise, and it's going to be very emotional, and it's going to be a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, because we have only 5 days. But that's where I think like the best ideas come from, and they're an amazing bunch of people, and just really looking forward to learning from all of them, I guess.
Cool. Well, huge thanks to you, Rikta and John, for joining us in this call, and Christina for helping to produce it, and for everyone who was dropping in links and comments and great questions. We definitely would love to be in touch. I'll drop in our GitHub issue tracker is probably one of the better places to kind of listen in and contribute ideas and stuff. And I'll also drop in our Twitter handles if you want to reach us that way. But Christina, anything? Yeah, I'll let you do an outro, and a huge thanks for helping put this on.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, John and Rikta as well. Just really quick before we sign off, I wanted to call your attention to line 164. We have some upcoming events that we'd love to continue the conversation with you, specifically about Internet of Things. We have a Teach the Web tweet chat being hosted by @MozTeach on Twitter. That's Thursday, April 28th, and it's going to be like throughout the day so that people from different time zones can participate. So follow @MozTeach or hashtag TTWchat for more details on that. And then our next community call is May 28th. You can find the times listed at 168, depending on where you are in the world. We'd love to have your attendance there as well, and it's going to be about the gigabit technology and community and Mozilla work. And then if you have any nonverbal updates that's related to IoT or not, feel free to drop them at the very end of the Etherpad. So thank you again. Speakers, you were awesome. Thank you very much. Etherpad folks, we love having a discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.